Good afternoon and good morning to those of you out west. Welcome to today's democast from Construction Specifier and Deltek. My name is Farheen. I'm the Associate Editor for the Construction Specifier, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. Just to cover a few housekeeping items before we get started, if you have any questions during today's democast, please enter them using the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your Zoom window. We will address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Zoom does have a raise hand function, but since we'll be keeping everyone's mics muted, only use the Q&A instead. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the democast, you can enter a message in the chat, which you'll find right next to the Q&A, and we'll do our best to help. Today's democast is being recorded and will be available on the Construction Specifier's website by this time next week. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Scott Taylor. Scott has more than 20 years of experience in specifications, construction documents, standards and practices, construction materials and methods, and field observation for architectural and engineering projects. As Senior Specification Writer at Deltek, Scott focuses on expanding AIA master spec content, taking into consideration the practice and needs of architects and engineers. In this democast, Scott will discuss 3 ways to uplevel your specifications. When construction documents lack detail, it affects the accuracy of the bid, and down the road can also impact the schedule and budget. In this democast, Scott will share tips on how to provide clear and concise instructions that improve your specifications and drawings and prevent any unnecessary RFIs, change orders, and rework. Scott will also discuss how to ensure the design intent and clear instructions for the contractor. Scott, we appreciate you joining us today. Please take it away.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and hope you are doing well today. You know, Deltek Specification Solutions is passionate about specifications, and we are always looking for ways to share that around, even if it's in short presentations such as this. You specifiers, you may find some of this information as reminders, or maybe you heard it before, but hopefully it would be something that you can encourage your team. When I think of the word up level for this presentation, it makes me think of how can we take what we do to another level of efficiency. Now, I know we all want to do our best, whatever we are doing, and I'm sure that we do. But you know, when it comes to bringing drawings and specs together, we all know that it could be a big challenge. So when we think about saying up level our specifications, we're talking about drawings as well, because we know that the drawings are spec and graphic representations. So knowing this, well, how does this thought thread our agenda today? So we're going to be talking about words such as ensure, improve, and clear, because all these things are what can help us up level our specifications and drawings. So let's not forget that as well. So really, how can we ensure the design intent is understood when it comes to the design being brought to life with the specifications and drawings? Well, here's something to consider. Did you know that Division 0 has a library of 31 documents? The specifier needs to know the source of this information. Did you know that Division 1 has over 35 sections in the library? The submittal procedure spec alone has 14 pages with over 4,500 words to pour through. Well, how would the specifier know the basic contract and general requirements, such as who's going to be responsible for different tasks and different things in the project? What about bidding requirements? What about project delivery, contractor requirements? Or will there be alternates, submittals, team structure, just to name a few things? You know, if you don't make time for the project review with the spec writer, whether that spec writer is in-house or a consultant, well, there could be changes there can be problems down the road. So either you answer those questions now or you answer them later. But everyone can benefit just by making time to do the project review. Well, what about when it comes to design components and the basis of design review? Well, that's important as well. I've worked on projects in the past where the architect, and this is not putting architects down, please don't take that way. But earlier in design, they didn't know what products they were going to use. They knew the materials, but they didn't know what product manufacturers. They had some idea. In Revit, some products families were selected, but they weren't sure what was going on with those. Well, when the project got to DD and probably 2 weeks before it was going out, then the information came through in terms of, oh, here's all the products that we're going to use now. So that was very frustrating to try to get all those products in the specs. And I'm sure that doesn't happen on any of your projects. But when you think about the design components and the basis of design, in regard to exteriors, did you know that there are over 70 spec sections in Division 7 alone related to the building envelope? In regard to interior design, there are 65 spec sections in Division 9 alone. Ceramic tile spec itself has 42 pages to pour over. So making time to review with the spec writer or the team, the exterior and interior design assemblies, this would certainly help in at least developing a table of contents. If you cannot find the time, please make sure such assemblies are clear on the drawings, even if all possible, on one page, so it make it easier to find. So having assemblies, you may start hearing that a lot. That's a big trend now. and developing assemblies on the drawings, or even in the beginning of this, of maybe your SD specs or even your DD specs, probably having like a uniformat type the document that showcases or brings together the different assemblies, whether exterior or interior. Well, what are some ways that we can improve the specification quality and accuracy? Well, I'm sure that seasoned spec writers do it all the time, always looking for ways to make everything better. But yet, as a team and with the drawings, those are also important in making such improvements. Some suggestions could be schedule some team spec coordination, whether that starts every week in the beginning of the project, or maybe it's every other week. Maybe it's every week when the project submission time is coming close. Well, this gives the project team a chance to do drawing and spec coordination basically in real time, especially when you're all in meeting together, whether that's virtual or in person. You get a chance to review the latest owner design changes. You get a chance to talk about maybe some pricing estimates that came in. You know, maybe you learned that there's a couple of things that maybe might need engineering. I can't remember the word right now, but value engineering. We need to take a few things out. We need to add a few things in. Maybe that's where alternates are discussed. So having a team meeting, I'm not sure if that's what your team is doing, but you may find it very helpful to start having weekly or bi-weekly team meetings. Also, did you know that there are over 150 raw data decisions to react to in the gypsum board spec alone? There are over 120 raw data decisions to react to in the Division 1 summary spec. I say this to show that spec production takes time. Please respect that, since drawings and spec production doesn't happen in parallel production. You know, every once in a while, a project may used to come along or it says, hey, we need specs in 2 weeks. Well, I'm not sure if they understand how to get a project, a brand new building out of the ground, specs in 2 weeks. I'm sure it can happen, maybe if it's an outline spec, but a full spec in 2 weeks, that could be very difficult and challenging. So just understand that when it comes to doing specs, there's a lot of decisions that has to be made. And therefore, as the architectural team, whether your spec writer is in-house or a consultant, helping them come to some of those decisions will help save some time. Another way that we can think in terms of improving our specs is making sure the specifier, without begging, has access to the current real-time drawing information. It can get really frustrating when the specifier is working from an SD narrative, unaware that the drawings are 50% CD, or working from a DD set of drawings that most of the data is from another project, and the drawings that the specifier may be using, he's not aware that a lot of the things are placeholders, or might be working from an early DD set when the drawings are basically currently 75% CD. Now, when I did work in an office, you would think that I would have access to the current drawings. The only way I had access to current drawings is if I opened Revit. And when I opened Revit, and I was really new to Revit at the time, and all I seen was the model. And they started having pages set up, but I definitely needed a lot of help. Now I'm sure a lot of specifiers, if you work in an office, you know where to go. By now, this was years and years ago for me. But just the point I'm trying to make is having real-time updates. So architects, design team, production team, make sure your specifier has up-to-date drawings. So even when you print them out, maybe in the schedule, you schedule QA, QC prints. Well, make sure that the specifier is aware of that and have access to that information, because that's really important that they can work together, especially since drawings and spec production doesn't always work. Production is not always parallel. Something else to think about when it comes to up-leveling specs and drawings is that they're clear. Now, what may be clear to me may not be clear to you, vice versa. And that's why when we work on a team, a second pair of eyes, a second pair of individuals doing QA and QC, we get a chance to really focus on when our minds come together, what is clear. And when it comes to the contractor, they have a language. So when we think about making something clear, as you can see in the slide, I used the word translation. We start with that word translation, and when we bring the drawings and specs together, they need to have a language as one that the contractor understands. When the contractor reads the specs and sees something different on the drawings, they see mistranslation. So they issue a RFI to clarify the language. So where can we start to help avoid a lot of drawing and spec mistranslation? And I tell you, even when I did work in an office, Steel drawings and specs were not always in translation because the production team had their way of doing things, especially when it comes to the keynotes, the general notes. I would hear, well, this is just how Revit is. We're not changing it. Well, they don't match the words in the specs. Well, can you change the specs to match the Revit words? Sometimes my answer was, well, the specs have industry words that's been around before you were born. So no, I'm not changing those. But you can change the words in Revit to match the specs. Well, I won't tell you the rest of that story. That's for another time. But one thing is for sure, when we see RFIs and we see that something is not clear on the drawings or in the specs, I know it makes us feel uneasy. And we always try to do what we can with our documents so that we get less RFIs. And that's what we want to try to do. So one way that we can help up-level our drawings and specs so there's not a mistranslation is think about it in the sense that the contractor, for the most part, basically looks at two things in a spec. They look at submittals, part one, and then they look at part two, what the products are. Let's take submittals. Since the submittal procedure spec, now the submittal procedure spec has 14 pages. I think I mentioned 4,500 words to pour over. Well, let's say that the spec production is up to 55 spec sections, not including division one. Did you know, really, if you think about it, that's 55 more submittal decisions that need to be made. So design team, CA team, let's help the specifier reflect on what you want to see versus what you care not to see. Similarly, when it comes to part two, the missing translation is a lot of times part two products. Does the basis of design products reflect those last minute changes? Let's go back to the project having 55 spec sections, not including division one. That is a minimum of 55 bases of design decisions and products that need to be made. That's going to affect your project. So when it comes to the drawings and specs, does your firm like to call out all the products on the drawings, whether exterior or interior? Or should they be in the specs? Well, different companies, different firms do different things. But one thing's for sure, however the decision is for that particular project, just make sure the specifier and that the whole team is on the same page so that there's not mistranslation between the team, therefore not reflected out when the drawings when the package gets to the contractor. So let's make sure that we make it very clear. And if you're going to put all your products on the drawings, whether exterior or interior, make sure you clear it with the specifier that do they need to add a couple of other manufacturers so that maybe there's a total of 3 bases of design on drawings and other manufacturers in the specs, or put all the manufacturers in the specs. Whatever decision that your firm does, just make sure that the specifier and the production team is right on target. What about keynotes? How are you doing with your keynotes these days? Are you still going back and forth as to what works and what doesn't work? Try this on a project. Work with a specifier. If you haven't done this already, work with a specifier to develop the table of contents. Start there. I mean, specifier needs a table of contents anyway. Then take it back to the team and use those spec words in the table of contents. Use them in your keynotes, use them in every detail, use them in every section, use them in your general notes. And if you need more words for the drawings, as callouts, the specifier will be happy to work with you because they will unleash a family of words within a group of product types for you, for your use. So yes, we don't want mistranslation between our teams so that goes out in the field to the construction team and we get a whole bunch of RFIs. We know that's not good. Well, let's summarize this. Let's put this together a little bit toward the end here. In summary, putting drawings and the specs together, that really takes a team effort. And, to up-level specifications, it takes working with the drawings. And therefore, try to have kickoff meetings. Sometimes maybe the schedule doesn't allow. But remember, if you don't answer questions early, those questions will have to come later. I've heard of some specifiers sending the architect maybe 10 pages of questions that relates to division one. And so therefore, the architect will see all those questions and like, what do I need all this for? Well, it's part of the specs. Like I mentioned before, division one has a large library and each spec section easily have 50 to 100 decisions that has to be made. So meeting with the specifier, getting that information together, knowing the bidding requirements, knowing owner and contractor requirements, not to say that you need to go over the fees. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just the basic requirements. How is the project going to be delivered? Who are the team players? All these things are important. Communicating that information up front. So think of communication as being interactive through the whole project if you can do that. Then we talked about an up-level and specs when it comes to scheduling, specs and drawing coordination. Try hard to do that. If you're not doing that, please try hard to do that, and you'll find that a lot of things will come together especially when the specifier needs decisions. Because if you don't give them decisions, they're going to make them, and they put placeholders as well. Oops, that's the specifier secret. I'm sorry. Put placeholders in specs. You should know that. But sometimes we have to do that because we're waiting for decisions. So we try to avoid doing that, but we know that sometimes we forget about those. That's being human, being honest, but let's work as a team so that those things don't happen. So whatever we can do, let's make sure that we try to keep things in real-time updates throughout the project. And lastly, when it comes to up-leveling our specs, let's make it our determination very hard that we try to make sure that our drawings and specs translate into one document, because we are as a team, and when these documents get out in the field, they don't just look at the specifier or the architect, they look at the whole team. So let's continue to work together. And I know sometimes it's hard for engineers to get on board with certain things, and engineers, if there's any engineers on this presentation, I'm not trying to point anything out about you, but as humans and how we have a tendency to be the way we do things, sometimes we may have to come out of our comfort zone. But in summary, let's do all we can to ensure, improve, and be clear. And when it comes to our drawings and specs, and bringing them together as one document. Thank you. Well, when it comes to something's wrong with when it comes to Deltek, again, as I mentioned before, we are passionate about specs, and we are a global diverse team of innovators, creators, and collaborators. And we love to learn, and we are growing, and this is something that we want to share with everyone. So please keep that in mind when it comes to knowing who Deltek is. That completes our presentation. I appreciate you very much for attending. Questions?
Thank you, Scott, for this very wonderful presentation. We do have time for questions, so just open the Q&A located at the bottom of your Zoom window and post your questions. We already do have a few coming in, so let's get started with those. Can you share with the team which document has authority over the others?
That's a really good question. Back in the day, it used to be where the specs rule, but technically the specs and drawing work as one document. So one don't outweigh the other. And it's important that if you ever get into an RFI or phone call with the contractor, let them know, because some contractors, old school, will still ask, so what do I go by, the drawings or the spec? And you make sure you remind them that specs and drawings work together, and we'll work to give you the answer you need.
Thank you for answering, Scott. The next question is, what's the difference between a performance spec and a typical specification?
Well, the performance spec, that's a good question. Performance spec basically deals with known products. So you're not naming any manufacturers. You're basically giving the information in terms of the materials and how you want everything to perform. So if you're doing a wall panel, you're not naming any product manufacturers. In that spec goes the different components, and it goes, then you add in there how you want that assembly to perform once it's installed.
Thank you for answering. What have you seen as the biggest disconnect between architects and specifiers?
Communication, and also spec words don't match drawing words, vice versa. That is one of the biggest problems that I see. Some drawings I see say drywall. Well, we know the spec says gypsum board, but some drawings say drywall. Also, putting things on drawings that is placeholders and not saying on the drawings that they're placeholders. There's been a lot of projects I've worked on where I specified the things that was on the drawings only to learn when the project was going to go out the next day that, oh, by the way, those are placeholders. So please keep that in mind.
Scott, it looks like you have another question here. Does the specifier review submittals or shop drawings or the architect?
There are projects where it may be in the contract if it's a consultant that if they put that, if that's part of the contract, yes. In-house, when I did work for firms in-house, that was part of my job to review submittals with the CA person. So really it's just up to the contract, but it does help when the specifier does help in reviewing submittals.
Okay, we have another question from the audience. If there is a conflict between specs and drawings, should an RFI be submitted?
You're talking about from the contractor side? If it's from the contractor side, definitely. Don't pick the drawings over the specs or vice versa. Submit the RFI and get the clarification.
Another question. It looks like this one is about most spec writers had checklists forms given to the architect, PMPA. Does master spec have such checklists built in?
Master spec has built-in checklists if it's part of your subscription that comes with every spec section. It's beautiful. They have a drawing and spec checklist, that a document that comes with every spec section, if that's part of, I believe that's, if that's part of your subscription. So yes.
Thank you for answering, Scott. Apologies, everyone, for the technical difficulty here. Can a specifier eliminate full boilerplate materials from a spec to get it reduced to the portions applicable?
You better believe it, but you got to make sure that you give them the information to help them reduce that information. Don't let them do it blindly. You gotta direct them. You gotta make sure they have that information, and they'll be happy to do that.
Thank you for answering. And last question I can take here is, should a multiple prime contract project proceed without a construction manager?
That is one question that it's hard to answer in a few seconds. I'm going to say it just really depends on the owner, and it just depends on the contract between the owner and the contractor. That's all I can say about that for now.
Thank you so much, Scott. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. That is all the time we have for questions. If you need to reach out with any additional questions, the presenter's contact information should currently be up on the screen. Just a reminder before everyone leaves, if you would like to rewatch today's presentation or share it with a colleague, we'll be emailing the link to the recording to everyone who registered for the democast within a week. So do keep an eye out on your inbox. Finally, after you shut down Zoom, you'll be taken to a survey to provide feedback on your experience today. Please take a moment to complete the survey, as it helps us to continue to serve your needs better in the future. On behalf of Construction Specifier and Deltek, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.